Let's bring in Colonel Cedric Leighton now, U.S. Air Force retired and president of Cedric Leighton Associates. Good to see you, Colonel, as always.
Good to see you too, Jonathan.
Leland was referring there to the possibility of a no-fly zone. Any chance that that could be implemented by the U.S. and other nations?
Yes, I think it would have to be implemented, though, without the UN, so it becomes a very interesting situation. But the reason I say without the UN is because of Russian and Chinese intransigence in this particular area, and their intransigence in letting us do anything with the Assad regime. So that would then bring NATO in, and as Leland mentioned, NATO and all of its resources will take some time to get into a position where they can actually effectively enforce a no-fly zone. So probably what would happen first is you would have a Navy carrier battle group going in, and then possibly also Air Force assets based in Turkey conducting missions that would then oversee a certain area of Syria. The question then becomes, though, what area of Syria do you oversee, and how do you actually enforce the no-fly zone?
So it's a lot. You know, people sitting watching could think, well, why don't we just get some planes up there and start knocking these, Syrian MiGs out of the sky? It's a heck of a lot more complicated than that. You need a lot of intelligence and a real plan for how you're going to implement this kind of thing.
That is absolutely correct, Jonathan. And the reason you need a lot of intelligence is because you don't want to make mistakes where you kill members, for example, of the rebel army. You want to make sure that you also are protecting civilians. So you need to know where the civilians are. You need to understand where the refugees are. You need to understand where the routes are that the refugees are taking. And you also need to understand the logistical supply elements that the army, the government army uses in Syria, as well as what the rebels use in Syria, and that becomes a very, very dynamic and fluid environment. It took us a long time to set up the no-fly zone for Iraq back after the first Gulf War, and it will also take a long time to do the Syrian no-fly zone very well, and that becomes a big, big issue, and it also requires a lot of international cooperation to get it right.
And there's a question of territory as well. What territory are you really protecting? Do the rebels have enough of an area that you could call it any sort of safe haven? How do you see that right now? It looks as though they're struggling, really.
It does look like they're struggling, and the problem that we have is that the situation is so fluid that you don't know exactly what parts of certain cities. For example, when you look at the fighting in Aleppo, there are so many neighborhoods that are changing hands probably on a daily, if not an hourly basis. And because they change hands so quickly, it becomes very, very difficult to keep track of exactly what's going on. And of course, the first casualty in any war like this is going to be the truth. And that is a very, very difficult thing for the intelligence apparatus to really look at and to really understand, so that then the operational pieces can come together and actually effectively enforce something like a no-fly zone.
But who's winning in Aleppo right now? Because that seems to be what this is coming down to, for the moment at least, Colonel, is just a fight for Aleppo.
Well, as you know, Aleppo is Syria's major city, and as far as who's winning, no one can really tell you for sure. It's a very difficult, very fluid situation. However, the rebels are saying right now that they have control of several neighborhoods in Aleppo, and that they are working on a particular area that connects to the main highway from Aleppo to Damascus. That main highway also serves as the government's main logistical trail, and if they can get that, then they can cut the government off from its supply forces, and if that happens, then they stand a chance at keeping Aleppo. The problem, though, is in Aleppo, they don't have as much popular support as appears to be the case in other parts of Syria.
So, what if the Assad regime ultimately falls, and most people would say that it will do, it's a matter of time, but that could be a long time, but if and when it does, and the rebels then have control of Syria, whatever form those rebels take, how are they going to look at us, Colonel? I mean, we're 18 months in now pretty much to this, and we've not, right, as they say, we've not given them much other than, honorable words.
And the honorable words are good as far as they go, but they're a real problem because they're not backed up by actual actions. They're not backed up by actual material. Communications gear is practically irrelevant for these people. They use their cell phones, and they use them fairly effectively to do command and control. What they need, as Leland mentioned, is good intelligence. And good intelligence becomes the key to winning not only for them, but it also becomes the key to enforcing a no-fly zone. And that is the real reason that we have to make sure that we share intelligence with them, but we also get intelligence from the rebels. And it requires an establishment of trust that, because of the failures of our policy, has been lacking. The rebels don't trust us. We don't know which elements of the rebels to trust, if any, and because we have failed to get in there and actually see what's on the ground in these areas, it becomes a real difficult morass from which to extricate ourselves, and it becomes very, very hard. And the rebels are going to look at us as being a little bit too late, a little bit too short, and a little bit unable to help them in their fight. And they believe that they're fighting for the same things that we would want to fight for in a situation like this.
All right, Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, President Cedric Leighton Associates. Great to have your insights as always, Colonel.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Pleasure being with you.
Thank you very much.